I never intended to speak about what I discovered in the Cayman Islands. For 15 years, I've carried this knowledge like a stone in my chest, growing heavier with each passing season. But silence, I've learned, has its own weight, and some truths demand to be told before they consume the one who holds them. In the autumn of 2009, I was hired by the Ashworth family to conduct a comprehensive audit of their Caribbean estate. The family had recently inherited the property from a distant relative, and they needed someone with my particular expertise in archival management and estate evaluation. I had spent the better part of 3 decades working for families of considerable wealth, organizing their private papers, their collections, their carefully guarded histories. The Ashworths were no different, or so I believed. The estate sat on a cliff top overlooking the turquoise expanse of the Caribbean Sea, its pale limestone walls gleaming against the endless blue. Built in what appeared to be the 1920s, it possessed that particular elegance of the colonial era, with wide verandas and tall windows designed to catch the trade winds. The current patriarch, Jonathan Ashworth, met me at the airport himself, which was unusual. Men of his standing typically sent drivers. "There's something peculiar about the archive," he said during our drive to the estate, his knuckles white against the steering wheel. "Files that predate the construction of the house itself. Files that shouldn't exist." I assured him that such discrepancies were common in inherited properties. I had no idea how wrong I was. The archive occupied the entire basement level of the main house, a climate-controlled sanctuary-lined floor-to-ceiling with mahogany filing cabinets. The moment I descended those marble steps, I felt the peculiar stillness that accompanies truly old documents, that particular silence of secrets preserved in paper and ink. The air tasted of leather bindings and something else, something metallic that I couldn't quite identify. My first week passed without incident. I catalogued the more recent acquisitions, property deeds dating back to 1924, correspondence between various Ashworth relatives, financial records spanning 8 decades. Standard fare for a family archive. But it was on Monday, November 9, 2009, at precisely 3:15 in the afternoon, that I encountered the first anomaly. Hidden behind a row of tax documents from the 1960s, I discovered a leather portfolio marked with a date that made no sense, 1873. The estate, according to all official records, had been constructed 51 years later. Yet here was a document bearing the Ashworth family crest, clearly authentic, predating the property's existence by half a century. Jonathan found me staring at the portfolio when he brought my afternoon tea, a habit he'd developed during my stay. His face went pale when he saw what I held. "You found them," he said quietly, setting the tray down with trembling hands. "The impossible files. My great-uncle warned me about those before he died. Said they appeared overnight decades ago." "Files don't appear overnight," I replied, though my voice lacked conviction. "These ones do." That evening, I returned to the archive against Jonathan's advice. He had suggested we examine the anomalous files together in the morning, but my professional curiosity had been thoroughly awakened. I had spent 30 years organizing the secrets of the wealthy, and I had never encountered anything I couldn't explain through simple genealogical research or misfiled documents. The basement seemed different after dark. The fluorescent lights cast sharper shadows between the filing cabinets, and the silence felt deeper, more complete. I made my way to the portfolio, noting that it seemed to occupy more space on the shelf than it had that afternoon, though such observations strike me now as the first whispers of an imagination under strain. The leather was old but remarkably well preserved, bound with a brass clasp that opened with surprising ease. Inside I found documents that challenged everything I thought I knew about archival work. Property surveys of land that wouldn't be purchased for another 5 decades. Architectural plans for rooms that didn't exist in the current structure. Financial records referencing investments that wouldn't be possible for generations. But it was the final document that stopped my breath entirely. A personnel record, dated 1873, bearing the letterhead of an estate management company I had never heard of. The position described was that of chief archivist. The duration of employment was listed as 15 years. The name at the top of the file was my own. Below it, in faded but legible script, someone had written, "Expected arrival, November 2nd, 2009. I had arrived on November 1st. I stared at the document until the letters seemed to blur and dance before my eyes. My rational mind offered explanations, a coincidence of names, perhaps, or some elaborate hoax orchestrated by the Ashworth family for reasons I couldn't fathom. Yet the paper felt genuinely aged beneath my fingertips, the ink faded to that particular brown that only comes with genuine antiquity. I photographed each page with my digital camera, though I suspected Jonathan would want to see the originals. The personnel record contained additional details that made my chest tighten with each line I read. My educational background, listed accurately down to the university I had attended. A physical description that matched my appearance with uncomfortable precision. Even my professional specializations were documented, though several were methodologies I had developed only in the past decade. The most disturbing entry appeared at the bottom of the page: personal effects to be maintained in Archive Room 7 until arrival date. Below this, someone had penciled in a note: items relocated to Room 7, November 1873. Awaiting retrieval. Archive Room 7 didn't appear on any of the building's architectural plans. I had spent a week in this basement, cataloging every cabinet, every corner, every door. There were 6 archive rooms, numbered sequentially from 1 to 6. Room 7 simply didn't exist. Yet as I closed the portfolio and prepared to return upstairs, I noticed something that made my hands shake. At the far end of the basement, beyond the area I had already explored, stood a door I was certain I had never seen before. The brass nameplate read, Archive Room 7. I approached the door with the careful steps of a man who has begun to question his own sanity. The basement's fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everything in stark relief, yet the door seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The brass nameplate gleamed as if recently polished, though the door itself appeared old, constructed from the same dark wood as the filing cabinets. The handle turned with surprising ease. Inside, Archive Room 7 proved smaller than the others, perhaps 12 feet square, lined with empty shelves save for a single glass display case positioned at the room's center. The case was illuminated by a small spotlight that had no visible power source, casting a warm amber glow throughout the space. Inside the case lay a collection of personal items that made my breath catch in my throat. A fountain pen, silver with black trim, identical to the one my grandfather had given me for my university graduation. A pair of wire-rimmed reading glasses that matched my prescription exactly. A leather portfolio bearing my initials, though I had never owned such an item. Most disturbing of all, a photograph of myself, taken outside my London office, though I couldn't remember when. Below these items lay a typewritten note on aged paper: Welcome, Thomas. We have been waiting considerably longer than anticipated. Your predecessor left detailed instructions for your transition. Please review the materials in Cabinet 18 at your earliest convenience. The Ashworth family must not be informed of this communication. The note was signed with a name I didn't recognize, dated November 18, 1873. The day I was supposedly hired, 136 years ago. Cabinet 18 stood precisely where the note indicated, though I was certain it hadn't been there during my initial survey of the archive. The drawers opened soundlessly, revealing a collection of documents that transformed my understanding of the Ashworth estate into something far more complex than a simple inheritance audit. The files contained correspondence spanning multiple generations, all addressing the same concern: the need to maintain what they termed temporal archival continuity. Letter after letter described the appearance of documents that predated their creation, files that materialized overnight containing information about events that had yet to occur. The pattern had persisted for over a century, with each generation of Ashworths faithfully cataloging these anomalies while desperately seeking someone who could explain them. More troubling still were the personnel records. My name appeared in employment documents dating back to 1873, with gaps corresponding exactly to my education, my previous positions, my entire career trajectory leading to this moment. Each entry was signed by a different member of the Ashworth family, as if they had been expecting my arrival for generations. The final document bore yesterday's date, November 10, 2009. In Jonathan's handwriting, I read, "Thomas Harrison has discovered the impossible files. Timeline proceeding as documented. Archive Room 7 access confirmed. Beginning final phase as instructed." Beneath this, in different handwriting, someone had added, "Remember, he must choose voluntarily. The position cannot be forced. If he refuses, the cycle resets, and we must wait for the next candidate." I realized then that the Ashworths hadn't hired me to audit their archive. They had hired me to become part of it. I spent the remainder of that night reading through documents that chronicled over a century of impossible occurrences. Each file painted a picture of an archive that existed outside the normal flow of time, documenting events before they happened, preserving records of conversations that had yet to take place. The Ashworth family had served as guardians, maintaining the collection while waiting for someone with the proper expertise to assume responsibility for its mysteries. The most revealing document was a journal written by my predecessor, a man named Edmund Whitmore, whose final entries dated to 1873. His handwriting grew increasingly erratic as he described his growing understanding of the archive's true nature. "The files are not predictions," he wrote. "They are memories, preserved from a future that has already occurred. The archive exists in all moments simultaneously, and those who serve it become unstuck from linear time." His final entry chilled me. "I have seen my replacement arrive on November 1, 2009. A man named Thomas Harrison, experienced in estate archival work, carrying the same questions I once carried. By the time he reads this, I will have been gone for 136 years, though for me, his arrival feels like tomorrow." Below this, in different ink, someone had added, "Thomas will serve for 15 years, as I have served, as those before me have served." The archive requires continuity. When his time ends, he will prepare for his successor, whose arrival he will document in these same files. The weight of predestination settled over me like a burial shroud. Morning arrived with Jonathan's familiar knock at the archive door. I had not slept, spending the dark hours poring over documents that painted an impossible picture of cyclical employment spanning centuries. When I emerged from the basement, he took one look at my haggard face and nodded with something resembling relief. "You found everything, then," he said, pouring coffee with hands steadier than mine. "My father went through this same revelation in 1974. His father before him in 1941. We've been custodians, Thomas, nothing more. Waiting for each archivist to discover his role." "This is madness," I said, though even as I spoke the words, I knew they rang hollow. The documents were too detailed, too consistent across generations to be fabricated. Archives don't exist outside of time. Employment records don't predict the future. Jonathan walked to the window overlooking the Caribbean Sea, his reflection ghostly in the morning glass. "My great-grandfather built this house in 1924 because the archive told him to. The original documents specified the exact dimensions, the precise location, even the type of limestone to be used. We've been following instructions written before any of us were born." He turned to face me, and I saw the exhaustion of generations in his eyes. "The choice is yours, Thomas. You can leave today, return to London, pretend this never happened. The archive will reset, wait for your successor. Or you can accept your position and discover what 15 years of impossible work truly means. And if I refuse? Then someone else will stand here asking the same questions you've asked." That afternoon, Jonathan showed me portions of the estate I hadn't known existed. Hidden behind what appeared to be a wine cellar lay another basement level, this one containing archives that stretched back centuries. Not just the Ashworth documents, but collections from families across the Caribbean, Europe, North America. Each section was maintained by someone like me, someone who had accepted a 15-year position that transcended normal understanding of employment. There are 12 of us currently, Jonathan explained as we walked through corridors lined with impossibly old filing systems. Each serves for 15 years, each maintains continuity for a different region, each prepares for a successor they will document but never meet. The system has operated this way since the 1700s. We paused before a brass plaque listing the names of previous archivists for the Caribbean section. Edmund Whitmore's name appeared at the top, followed by 11 others, each with their 15-year tenure carefully noted. At the bottom, someone had engraved, Thomas Harrison, 2009 to 2024. The work isn't difficult, Jonathan continued. You maintain the files, you document the anomalies, you preserve the impossible records that appear overnight. In return, you gain access to information that exists outside normal time. You'll know things before they happen, understand patterns that span generations. And after 15 years? You'll document your successor's arrival, prepare everything for their transition, and then. He paused, choosing his words carefully. Then you'll understand why the archive requires this continuity. The brass plaque gleamed in the artificial light, my name already waiting. I accepted the position that evening, though acceptance feels like an inadequate word for what transpired. Sitting in Jonathan's study, surrounded by family portraits whose subjects seemed to watch our conversation with knowing expressions, I signed documents that had been waiting for my signature since 1873. The ink was still wet on pages that should have been yellowed with age. The work begins immediately, Jonathan said, sealing the contracts in an envelope that bore my name in handwriting I didn't recognize. You'll find that the archive responds to your presence now. Files will appear overnight, documents will arrange themselves according to patterns you'll learn to interpret. The estate has been waiting for you specifically, Thomas. That first night as official archivist, I discovered he was correct. I descended to the basement to find new filing cabinets that hadn't existed hours before, their drawers filled with records documenting events I was certain hadn't yet occurred. Property transfers dated years into the future, correspondence between people who hadn't been born, financial records for companies that didn't exist. Yet as I read through these impossible documents, I began to understand their purpose. They weren't predictions, as Edmund Whitmore had realized decades earlier. They were instructions, a complex system for maintaining stability across generations of families whose wealth and influence shaped global events. The archive preserved continuity by ensuring that certain decisions would be made, certain paths would be followed. I was not just maintaining records. I was helping to write history before it happened. The 15 years that followed transformed my understanding of time, memory, and the delicate mechanisms that preserve power across generations. Each morning brought new files, new documents that detailed events months or years into the future. I learned to read these temporal archives like weather patterns, understanding how small decisions by wealthy families would ripple across decades. The work proved more complex than simple record-keeping. The archive required active maintenance of what Jonathan termed probability threads. When documents appeared describing undesirable futures, I would prepare counter-documentation, ensuring that alternative pathways would be followed instead. A carefully worded letter placed in the right file at the precise moment could prevent financial disasters, redirect inheritance disputes, even influence political decisions made by families whose wealth commanded global attention. I corresponded regularly with the other 11 archivists, though we never met in person. Our letters arrived through the archive's own delivery system, messages that appeared overnight in designated folders. Together, we maintained a vast network of temporal continuity, ensuring that the established order remained stable despite the chaos of normal historical progression. The strangest aspect of my service was how natural it all became. By my 5th year, I no longer questioned documents that detailed conversations I would have the following week. By my 10th year, I was writing reports for my successor, describing his arrival with the same certainty Edmund Whitmore had described mine. The archive existed outside normal time, and those who served it became part of that existence. We were curators of causality itself. My final entry as Caribbean archivist is dated November 1, 2024, exactly 15 years after my arrival. Tomorrow, my successor will discover the impossible files, just as I did, just as Edmund Whitmore did before me. I have prepared everything according to the protocols documented by previous generations: the personnel record with his name and arrival date, the collection of personal effects that will appear in Archive Room 7, the sequence of revelations that will guide him toward acceptance. His name is Marcus Webb. He specializes in colonial-era documentation, has worked for several British families with Caribbean holdings, and possesses the particular combination of professional expertise and intellectual curiosity that the archive requires. He will arrive believing he has been hired to assess water damage to historical records, and like me, he will discover that some positions choose their occupants rather than the reverse. Jonathan's grandson now manages the estate, maintaining the family's guardianship with the same quiet dedication his ancestors demonstrated. The cycle continues, as it must, as it always has. The archive preserves continuity across generations, ensuring that certain knowledge remains protected, certain patterns remain undisturbed. As I write these final words, I understand what Edmund Whitmore meant about feeling untethered from linear time. 15 years of service have shown me that past and future are merely organizational categories, useful for filing but ultimately artificial. The archive exists in all moments simultaneously. Tomorrow, I will witness my replacement's arrival, though I documented it years ago. Some responsibilities transcend the conventional boundaries of time.